My name is Vivian Harper. I am 66 years old, a widow who has spent her entire life holding together what was once a proud family in the heart of Michigan. For years, I worked the apple orchards with my late husband. I carried the weight of our home, our land, and the dignity of our name. Now, I live alone, often forgotten, like a book left on a dusty shelf. People see me as quiet, gentle, the kind of woman who never raises her voice. What they do not know is that silence can be stronger than any scream. On the morning of my daughter's wedding, I dressed with trembling hands. Emily, my only child, my life's greatest work of love, was about to walk down the aisle. I thought I had done everything right. I had raised her with kindness, given her an education, shielded her when she was mocked as a little girl for being different, and told her again and again that beauty lives in the heart. That morning, I prayed with my wooden rosary, the one I had carried through every hardship. My prayer was simple: let her be cherished, let her be safe. The church of St. Luke stood bright in the autumn sun. Guests laughed, music floated from the organ, and the smell of lilies and polished wood filled the air. I should have felt joy. Instead, something pressed heavy against my chest as if warning me. I walked down the side corridor to catch my breath, away from the crowd. That was when I heard it. Through the half-open door of the groom's room came the voice of Mark Dalton, my future son-in-law. Clear, arrogant, cruel, he was laughing with his friends, his voice cutting through the quiet hallway like broken glass. And then I heard the words that froze my blood. The thought of sleeping with that fat pig makes me sick. They all laughed. Mark laughed the loudest. For a moment I could not breathe. My hands tightened around my rosary beads until they dug into my skin. That fat pig, he was talking about Emily, my daughter, my angel in white lace, who even now was sitting in the bridal room believing she was about to be loved for life. My heart dropped into an abyss. Another voice chimed in. At least you get the Harper orchard. A man can put up with anything for land and money. Mark's reply was a cold dagger. Of course. Do you think I'd look at her twice if not for that inheritance? Their laughter rang out again, sharp and merciless. I felt myself sway against the wall. My lips trembled, but no words came. In that instant, every sacrifice of my life, the nights working extra jobs, the years of loneliness, the love I poured into raising Emily, was turned into a joke. They were mocking not only my daughter, but everything I had ever built. And yet, instead of bursting in and screaming, I did something else. I took a slow breath. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it might break through my chest, but I forced myself into stillness. With a calmness I did not feel, I stepped forward and let the heel of my shoe strike the floor deliberately. A noise, small but enough. The laughter inside stopped. The door creaked open. Mark appeared, his face shifting instantly into the mask of charm. His tie was perfect, his smile rehearsed, his eyes hiding the cruelty I had just heard. "Mrs. Harper," he said warmly, as if I had not heard a single word. "Is everything all right?" I looked at him. I saw the mask, and beneath it, the wolf's grin. I could have spat in his face. I could have torn the mask away. But instead, I smiled. Just a thin, quiet smile. Because at that moment, I made a promise to myself. He thought he had already won. He thought I was powerless, a mother too soft, too invisible to matter. He had no idea that I had heard everything. And he had no idea that I would be the one to have the last laugh. I walked away from that door, my legs steady, though my soul was shaking. Every step echoed in the corridor like the toll of a bell. Guests passed me, nodding politely, unaware that my world had just split in two. I returned to the bridal room, where Emily was glowing in her gown, cheeks flushed with joy. She looked at me with eyes full of trust, the same eyes that once turned to me after school when the other children had been cruel. She had no idea. Laura Martin, her best friend, was at her side, fussing over flowers and makeup. Laura smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes I could not name then, a shadow, a flicker that unsettled me. Emily laughed nervously. "Mom, you look pale. Are you sure you're all right?" I forced my lips into another smile. "I am fine, sweetheart, just a little tired." Inside, my chest burned. How could I tell her that the man she adored had just called her a name too vile for any mother to repeat? How could I break her heart on the day she had dreamed of since she was a girl? So I stayed silent. I sat quietly as her friends flitted about as the organ swelled and the bells rang. I held my rosary tight and I whispered to myself, silence is not weakness. Silence can be a blade if used at the right time. As Emily took her first steps down the aisle with Mark waiting, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He believed his mask would never slip, but I had heard his true voice. I had seen his true face. And though the world thought me small, forgotten, a relic of another time, I was not powerless, not anymore. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning. When the church bells faded and the vows were spoken, I walked out into the cool autumn air with a smile fixed on my face. No one could see the storm inside me. To everyone else, I was just another proud mother who had given her daughter away. But in truth, I felt more like a ghost, drifting through a celebration that no longer belonged to me. You see, I was not always invisible. There was a time when I was the center of our household, the one who held everything together. My late husband, Charles, used to tell people that I was the spine of the Harper family. I worked alongside him in the orchards, raised our daughter, balanced the books, and kept the home alive. Back then, people would come to me for advice, for comfort, for a warm meal after a long day in the fields. My silence was respected. My presence was solid. But when Charles died 10 years ago, something shifted. It was as if the world believed my role had ended along with his life. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors saw me only as the widow on the hill. Even Emily, in her young adulthood, began to see me less as her guide and more as a reminder of her own fears. Slowly, I became the woman people overlooked, the quiet figure in the back pew at church, the one carrying her own groceries without help, the one left off the guest lists because she was thought to be too fragile, too old, or simply unnecessary. Living alone in the farmhouse where Charles and I once laughed together was like living in a museum of memories. The walls held our photographs, the fields held our sweat, and every corner whispered his name. The orchard itself seemed to breathe with him. Each row of apple trees carried the echo of our footsteps when we planted them side by side, dreaming of a family legacy that would last. Now, I walked those rows alone, carrying pruning shears in one hand and my rosary beads in the other. That rosary had become my companion, smooth, dark walnut beads worn down by decades of prayers. It was more than an object of faith. It was an anchor. I would pass each bead through my fingers on sleepless nights, whispering for strength, whispering for peace. When Emily was little and cried about children calling her names at school, I would sit on her bed, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped around that rosary, as though its quiet weight could lend me enough courage to lend her. Now, at 66, I clutched it for myself. It steadied my hands when they trembled from grief, when the house felt too large, when the orchard felt too empty. And on the morning of Emily's wedding, when I heard Mark's cruel words through that door, it was the beads digging into my palm that kept me from screaming. Silence, pressed into wood and prayer, was my only weapon. Emily is everything I ever lived for. She was my miracle child, born late in my marriage when I thought it was too late. She came into the world small and fragile, with eyes so wide they seemed to drink in everything at once. From the beginning, she carried a softness that made me both proud and afraid. Proud because she felt deeply, loved easily, and forgave quickly. Afraid because I knew the world rarely rewards such tenderness. As she grew, that softness became a target. Children teased her for her weight, for the way she blushed when embarrassed, for the way she avoided confrontation. I remember her running into my arms one afternoon, tears streaking her cheeks, saying, "Mom, they called me a pig." My heart broke then, just as it broke again in that hallway years later. That day, I told her she was beautiful in her own way, that her heart was stronger than any cruel word. She wanted to believe me. I wanted her to believe me. But insecurities are like shadows. They linger even in the brightest rooms. Emily carried those scars into adulthood. She never saw what I saw, a woman whose smile lit up every corner of our home, whose laugh was the music of my life. She only saw the flaws that others pointed out. That is why she clung so tightly to Mark. He made her feel, for the first time, that someone outside her mother's love could accept her. She confused his attention for devotion, his charm for safety. As her mother, I tried to stand by quietly, to let her live her life, to trust her choices. But inside, I worried. I knew she was vulnerable to any man who could disguise cruelty as affection. And now, standing in that church, I realized my worst fear had come true. Still, I did not crumble. Because the story of my life has never been about giving up. I am the widow who works the orchard alone. I am the mother who holds her daughter through storms. I am the forgotten woman who refuses to be erased. And though the world may see me as silent, I know my silence carries weight. It has carried me through widowhood, through loneliness, through humiliation. It will carry me now. The beads in my hand remind me, silence can wound deeper than a shout, and patience can be sharper than any blade. I left the bridal room with a calm face because calm was the only shield I had. The organ warmed up in the nave. Ushers directed cousins and neighbors into pews. A florist adjusted a ribbon on the aisle lanterns. The air smelled of lilies and lemon polish. I moved along the side corridor of St. Luke, my heels soft against old stone. On the wall, brass plaques carried the names of families who had built this church long before my time. I thought of my own family, of all the Sundays I had sat with Charles and Emily in the third pew, hands clasped. Of the day we buried Charles and I learned what silence could do. The world around me sparkled with celebration. Beneath it, I felt the floor tilt. From the groom's room came a rustle of suits, then laughter, bright as shattered glass. I knew the cadence of that laughter now. Mark Dalton, my future son-in-law, leading the pack. He did not need to repeat the ugly phrase I had already heard. I heard it anyway, carrying on the swagger in his voice. Another man said something about the orchard, about how a little patience can buy a lot of land. More laughter followed. My jaw tightened. I pressed my thumb against a smooth bead of my rosary. The walnut surface had been shaped by decades of prayers, and it steadied me. In the nave, a child spun in her dress while her mother shushed her. In the choir loft, the soprano ran a scale. Sunshine poured through stained glass in red and gold. I was inside this beauty and separate from it at the same time. A woman I had known for 40 years leaned close to whisper congratulations. I thanked her. I kept moving. I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to break the day that belonged to my daughter. The corridor turned and opened toward the sacristy. The door to the bridal room stood ajar again. Emily laughed at something. The sound made me both strong and fragile. Laura Martin stood near the mirror with a can of hairspray, a clipboard tucked under her arm, the badge of a friend who had made herself into a planner. Laura had the skill of filling a room. She moved with quick, efficient hands. She smiled as though every problem had a solution already waiting in her pocket. "May I have a word with Emily?" I asked. My voice was steady because I made it steady. Laura's smile stayed. Her arm drew an invisible line across the space. "Of course, Mrs. Harper. We are right on schedule. The procession starts in 20 minutes. The photographer needs a few last shots. Maybe after that." She turned to Emily without waiting for my answer. "Sweetheart, chin up, shoulders back. You look stunning." Emily's eyes found mine in the mirror. "Mom, are you sure you are okay? You look pale." "I am fine," I said. I stepped closer. I lowered my voice. "Emily, I need 2 minutes. Just you and me." Laura shifted her stance. It looked like courtesy. It felt like a gate. "Nerves are contagious, Mrs. Harper, and brides pick up on everything. If there is anything that might stress her, maybe we handle it after the ceremony." She held my gaze a fraction too long. It was the look a nurse gives a patient when the chart has a note about anxiety. Gentle, dismissive, managerial. "It is about marriage," I said. Laura's smile thinned. "Then I promise you there is nothing to worry about." Mark is devoted. He has been here early at every fitting. He emailed the caterer himself when the entree changed. He is thoughtful in ways most men are not. A phone buzzed on the vanity. Laura flipped it face down with a quick tap. For an instant before the screen went dark, I saw a notification bar, an unfamiliar bank app, the name Dalton Management, a figure with too many zeros to be a bouquet reimbursement. It might have been a coincidence. It might have been a shadow cast by my fear. Either way, my stomach nodded. "I need my mother," Emily said softly. "Laura, could you give us a minute, please?" Laura hesitated. The planner in her did not like gaps. Then she lifted her chin. "1 minute," she said. She left the door open and stationed herself just outside, speaking to the photographer in a low voice as if she could clock our conversation like a shift supervisor. Emily turned to me. The lace at her wrists trembled. "Mom, what is it?" I had a choice. Pull the fire alarm that lived behind my ribs, or protect my daughter from a public collapse. The words I carried were too heavy for a bridal room, too sharp for a morning built from flowers and vows. I wanted to say the phrase I had heard, to wash this room with the truth, to stop the ceremony before a single step toward the altar could be taken. I pictured us both running. I pictured the town's gossip burning through years of our lives. I pictured Emily's face caving in under humiliation she would never forget. I reached for her hands. When you love someone, the love you give yourself should not be smaller. It should not beg for permission to exist. My voice shook once. Then it held. If anything today makes you feel less than who you are, you have my blessing to stop, no matter what anyone thinks. Emily's eyes filled, not with panic, but with gratitude, then confusion. Is this about Mark being late to the rehearsal? Laura told me he was stuck on the highway. You know how he is with planning, absent-minded. I swallowed. The truth pressed hard against my throat. "Listen to your own breath," I said. "Listen to the way your heart answers when you ask it if you feel safe." The corridor swelled with music as the organist warmed another hymn. Laura stepped in again, balancing a velvet ring box and a clipboard. "Time to line up. Sorry to rush. The pastor is ready." She put a hand on Emily's shoulder. The gesture was sweet. It also nudged Emily away from me by an inch. "Mark sent a text. He's at the front with the groomsmen. He looks nervous. It is adorable." "Does he?" I said. Laura's eyes flicked to mine. "You have done so much for Emily. Now let us do our part. Support her. Keep the day light." The words were tinted with kindness. They carried the scent of a lecture. She turned to the door. "Positions, everyone." I stood in that small room a second longer. The mirror multiplied us. A mother, a daughter, a friend who had become a gatekeeper. My rosary lay coiled in my palm. I could feel every decade of Hail Marys in its weight. I pressed the cross to my pulse. If I spoke now, I would become the villain in the story others were already writing about me. If I stayed silent, I might be the fool who watched her child walk into harm. The photographer clicked. Flash, praise, do not move, chin up. The bridesmaids floated into the hallway like petals. Laura counted them under her breath. Emily squeezed my fingers, a squeeze we had invented when she was small and could not sleep. A code that said, "I am here." A code that said, "Do not leave me." "I am with you," I said, "all the way." She smiled, a tremulous, brave smile that broke my heart and mended it in the same second. She lifted her bouquet. The bells began to ring for real. Laura guided her to the threshold. The aisle opened like a river lit by stained glass. My place waited in the front pew. An usher offered his arm. I thanked him. I walked. I wanted to be the mother who yanked the emergency brake. I wanted to be the mother who believed in grace and timing. Between those two wants stretched a narrow bridge. I crossed it on faith. I took my seat. I folded my hands around the rosary. I chose silence not as surrender, but as strategy. The organ rose. The doors swung wide. I promised myself one thing as the congregation stood. Whatever happened next, I would not let my daughter face it alone. The bells were already ringing when I took my seat in the front pew. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass, painting the aisle in shifting colors of ruby and gold. I folded my hands around my rosary and tried to steady the tremor in my chest. The whole church seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the doors to open. And then they did. Emily appeared in the doorway like a vision, her gown shimmering with each step, her dark hair crowned in white flowers. The congregation rose, there were gasps of admiration, the organ swelled into a triumphant hymn. My daughter looked radiant. To them, she was a bride glowing with joy. To me, she was still the little girl who once ran to me with tear-streaked cheeks, whispering, "They called me a pig." I heard Mark's cruel echo of that word, even as she walked toward him smiling. My heart broke open in silence. Laura Martin held her arm, guiding her down the aisle as though she were the guardian of this moment. Her face wore a dutiful smile, but when her eyes flicked to mine, I caught something else. A glance sharp as glass, unreadable, almost warning. It unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I lowered my gaze and pressed the beads tighter into my palm. I could have stood up. I could have shouted what I had heard in that back hallway. The words tasted like fire on my tongue, begging to be released. But I did not. Not because I lacked courage, but because I chose my weapon. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. The minister's voice carried over the crowd as the vows began. "Do you, Emily Harper?" She answered yes, her voice trembling but full of hope. I felt each word slice against me like a blade, yet I kept still. My lips whispered only to myself. Silence does not mean weakness. It was the line I repeated in my heart like a prayer, the first echo of a truth I would need for what was coming. The rings were exchanged. The kiss sealed. Applause filled the vaulted space. Everyone saw a wedding blooming like a perfect rose, only I knew there were thorns hidden under every petal. And so I sat with my rosary, head bowed slightly, a mother who looked calm to the world. But inside, I vowed to myself I would carry the silence until the right moment came, and when it did, my silence would roar louder than any cry. The celebration ended, and the guests went back to their homes with smiles and stories of a perfect wedding. But for me, the days that followed carried no joy. They carried whispers. By the end of the first week, those whispers had grown into something sharper, something that cut every time I stepped outside. At the Saturday market, where I had gone for apples and flour since I was a young wife, I felt the stares before I heard the voices. Two women at the tomato stall leaned closer to each other when I passed. "That poor Emily," one said, her voice pitched just loud enough. Imagine a mother so desperate to keep her daughter that she would invent lies about the groom. The other woman clucked her tongue. Jealousy is ugly at that age. No wonder she lives alone now. I tightened my grip on my basket and kept walking. My cheeks burned, but my steps stayed steady. That was how cruelty worked in a small town. Not with shouts, but with whispers that spread like smoke, filling every room until you could not breathe. Later, as I bent over the beans at another stall, I heard laughter from behind. A group of children ran past, their voices shrill in the cool morning air. "Fat pig," they squealed, the phrase bouncing off the cobblestones. It was the same phrase I had heard from Mark's lips. He had not only spoken it in private, he had released it into the world like a poison, and now it lived in the mouths of children. I stood frozen for a moment, the beans spilling through my fingers. Every instinct in me wanted to turn and shout, to stop them, to stop everyone. But I did not. I picked up the beans one by one, put them back into the crate, and paid the vendor with hands that did not shake. Silence again. Not weakness, but restraint. It was then that I noticed her. Margaret Cole, my neighbor from down the road. She was older than me, her back bent with years of labor, her eyes clouded but still sharp with understanding. She did not join the whispers. She did not laugh with the children. She simply met my gaze across the market. And then she nodded, just once, slow and deliberate. That nod was nothing to anyone else. But to me, it was recognition. She saw me. She believed me. Her silence was different from mine. It was not strategy, but sympathy. It reminded me that even in the deepest loneliness, someone might still carry a small ember of truth for you. I carried my groceries back to the farmhouse, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the orchard, the sun was sinking low, turning the apple trees gold. I set the bags on the counter, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled the rosary into my hands. For years, I had prayed for strength. That evening, I prayed for patience. But as the beads slid through my fingers, another thought rose like a steady drumbeat in my chest. The truth will speak for me. I whispered it aloud, letting the words settle in the empty kitchen. The truth will speak for me. I was tired of defending myself against lies I did not start. I was tired of carrying the shame of someone else's cruelty. Mark thought he had written the story of my downfall. The town thought they knew who I was, but they did not know me at all. From that moment, I stopped caring about the gossip that floated through the market stalls and the church pews. Let them talk. Let them point. I would not waste my voice fighting rumors. My silence did not surrender. It was a promise that one day soon the truth would rise, undeniable and sharp as the morning sun over the orchard. I drove to Emily's house on a weekday afternoon without calling first. The sky over the neighborhood was a brittle winter blue, and my breath fogged the glass as I parked. The front door was unlocked. A vase of white roses sat on the foyer table, and a stack of glossy wedding thank you cards waited beside a gold pen. I followed the murmur of voices into the living room and stopped at the edge of the rug. Emily was seated at the desk that faced the window. Mark stood beside her with his hand on the back of her chair, a salesman guiding a signature. My daughter's posture was dutiful and tired. A pile of documents lay in front of her, flagged with yellow arrows that said, "Sign here." Mark looked up and smiled as if I were a neighbor dropping by with pie. He said the paperwork was simple and routine. He said they were just cleaning up a few items after the wedding. He said the bank liked everything neat. I stepped closer. The top page bore a title in bold type that might as well have been a siren: Power of Attorney. Beneath it, a paragraph in dense legal print. The words durable and general and all powers were scattered like nails across a road. Emily's name appeared as principal. Mark's name appeared as attorney in fact. The next document used phrases that made my chest tighten: security interest, collateral, lien, encumbrance. A writer listed Harper Orchard in legal meters and bounds, parcel numbers I knew by heart, the same lines my husband and I had studied when we bought the last strip of land along the creek. My fingers found the walnut beads in my coat pocket and closed around them hard. Emily signed another page without reading. The pen squeaked slightly against the paper. I heard my own voice in my head, not pleading but clear. Just a few strokes, and my daughter loses everything. The thought carried weight. It settled in my bones. I looked at Mark's face. He wore kindness like a tie. His fingertips tapped the margin where the notary box waited for a stamp. He told Emily this would help with a small operating loan. He told her married couples help each other. He told her the attorney had already reviewed everything. Which attorney? I asked. Mark answered with a name I did not recognize and a city 2 hours away. He said it quickly, then shifted topics to interest rates and timing. "Mom," Emily said, trying to be cheerful, "we are consolidating. It will make life easier." "Easier for whom?" I asked. I kept my voice so soft it could not be accused of hostility. I kept my face steady. Mark explained again. The explanation became a longer version of "trust me." The phone on the desk buzzed. Mark glanced at the screen and excused himself to take the call on the patio. A moment later, Emily stood and pressed her fingers to her temple. "I need some water," she said. She walked toward the kitchen, the hem of her sweater tugging at her waist like a nervous habit from childhood. I was alone with the documents. Time stretched thin. It did not stop. I turned off the camera shutter sound on my phone. I slid the first page toward the edge of the desk and took a photo, then the next, then the next. Power of attorney again, durable power, a springing clause that granted immediate effect, a clause that waived accounting, a clause that authorized real property transactions. I took a photo of each clause, a security agreement with a schedule of collateral that included equipment, accounts, inventory, crops, proceeds, fixtures, a deed of trust prepared but not yet recorded, trustee line blank, county filled in, a legal description that contained the orchard's East 40, a guarantee naming Emily as guarantor of obligations owed by Dalton Management, cross-default language, cross-collateralization, a jury trial waiver, an arbitration clause, a choice of law provision that was not our state. My heart slammed once, twice, then became a metronome. I photographed a draft UCC financing statement with a box checked for all assets. I photographed an assignment of rents with a space for a notary seal. I photographed a letter authorizing the bank to discuss matters with Mark without separate consent. I photographed the signature pages and the sticky flags. I replaced each sheet exactly where it had been, aligning the corners, reattaching a paperclip that had bent. I heard the sink in the kitchen turn on. I heard Mark's laugh filtered through glass. I heard my own breath move in and out like a small tide. The last document in the stack was a consent. It stated that Emily understood and agreed that the orchard could be pledged to secure future indebtedness. It stated that she waived notice of default. It stated that she acknowledged the value received. I took the photo and slid the page back. My phone screen showed a neat grid of images, each one a small square that held a razor. The beads in my pocket were warm now from my hand. I pressed the cross flat against my palm. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I felt something else move into place inside me. A quiet click. A latch closing. Emily returned with a glass of water and a hopeful smile. "Sit down, Mom," she said. "Mark says we can visit the bank together next week. It will reassure you." "That would be good," I said. I'm always reassured by clarity. Mark stepped in from the patio, cheerful as a host, and asked if I could stay for dinner. I said I could not. The orchard needed checking before the frost. He walked me to the door with courteous phrases about family. I thanked him for taking care of Emily. The words tasted like iron. On the porch, I hugged my daughter and let the hug linger. I pressed my cheek to her hair and breathed in the faint scent of shampoo and paper. "Listen to your own breath," I whispered. "It will tell you the truth." On the drive home, the road unspooled between fields glazed with late light. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I counted my breaths and the fence posts and the signs for the county line. When I reached the farmhouse, I set my purse on the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through the photos, tapping each image until it filled the screen. The language was dry and absolute, the kind of language that steals without ever raising its voice. I transferred the photos to my computer. I saved them in 2 places. I wrote down the document names in a notebook in my own hand. The beads lay beside the keyboard. Every decade, a small country I had already traveled through. "Just a few strokes and my daughter lost everything," I repeated, and the sentence did not crush me anymore. It guided me. Power does not always announce itself with volume. Sometimes it begins in a quiet room with a camera set to make no sound. Sometimes it begins with a mother who refuses to be erased. That afternoon, something shifted. Not in the town, not in Mark, not in Emily. It shifted in me. I had been waiting for the truth to speak on its own. Now I gave it a voice and a record. The reversal did not look like thunder. It looked like evidence. It looked like a woman who held her silence, and in doing so took back the ground under her feet. I sat at the kitchen table that night with the stack of photographs spread out on my laptop screen. Each image of the documents burned into my eyes. Power of attorney, mortgage of assets, assignment of rents. The words carried the weight of a wrecking ball. I knew I couldn't face this storm alone. There was only one man I trusted with the language of the law. Victor Lane. Victor had been our family's attorney for more than 40 years. He had guided Charles and me through property disputes, taxes, even the adoption of a boundary line that once threatened to split our orchard in half. After Charles died, Victor was the only one who still addressed me as though my voice mattered. His office, a second-floor room above an insurance agency, smelled of paper and old leather. Books lined every wall, their spines cracked from decades of use. When I called him, his voice was as gravelly and steady as I remembered. "Vivian, come in tomorrow. Bring everything." The next morning, I drove into town with the USB drive in my purse. The sun was sharp, unforgiving, and my palms sweated against the steering wheel. Walking up the narrow staircase to his office felt like climbing into my past. Victor rose from behind his oak desk, thinner than I remembered, his hair fully white, glasses sliding down his nose. But his eyes were still sharp, still searching. I handed him the drive. He plugged it in without a word, clicked through the files, and began to read. Silence stretched across the room, broken only by the scratching of his pen as he took notes. I held my rosary in my lap, bead by bead, praying not for comfort this time, but for clarity. After nearly an hour, Victor leaned back. His sigh was heavy. "Vivian," he said, his tone both grave and kind, "you were right to bring these to me. These are not routine documents. They are a blueprint for takeover." I swallowed. "Takeover of what?" "Of everything," he answered flatly. "Mark has been structuring this for months. The powers of attorney alone give him near total control of Emily's legal and financial decisions. Add the security agreements, the collateral clauses, the mortgages. You're looking at a systematic move to seize the Harper estate. And if she signs even one more set of papers like these, your orchard, your home, every acre you and Charles built will be out of your hands." I felt my throat close. He used her trust. He used her love. Victor's eyes softened, but his words were unsparing. "If your daughter signs more, you will be the one left with nothing in your own house. Nothing." The bluntness hit me like a slap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought of the orchard, the apple blossoms in spring, the harvests Charles and I celebrated, the sweat of workers who had trusted our family. Could it all vanish with a few careless signatures? I sat still, pressing the cross of the rosary into my palm until it hurt. Anger welled up, but I kept my voice even. "I will not let that happen." Victor leaned forward. "Then you need to be strategic. You cannot storm in with accusations. Mark will twist it, and Emily may defend him. What you need is more evidence. A clear trail. He has likely already leveraged Emily's name for loans in Chicago or Detroit. We must catch him with both hands on the deed before he closes the trap." The room tilted slightly, as though the weight of his words bent the air. "How do I stop him without losing Emily?" I asked. "You stop him by letting the truth do the work," Victor said. "Let the documents speak. Let the banks reveal his schemes. You do not need to scream, Vivian. You need to be precise." I nodded slowly. His advice matched the vow I had already made to myself. Silence was not weakness. Silence was waiting for the right moment. Victor wrote down names of institutions and contacts, places he could start digging. "I'll prepare contingencies. If Mark tries to file these papers with the county, I'll know. But Vivian, you must stay vigilant. Do not let Emily sign anything further." As I rose to leave, my knees trembled, but my voice did not. "Thank you, Victor. You've carried my family before, but hear me now. I will not let that man steal the soil beneath my feet, not while I still have breath." Victor's eyes shone with something like respect. He extended his hand, and I took it. His grip was firm, but it was my own resolve that I felt strongest. Walking down the staircase back to the street, I repeated the words silently. I will not let it happen. They rang, in my chest louder than the town's traffic, louder than the whispers that still followed me in the market. For the first time since the wedding, I felt the ground steady under me. After I left Victor's office, his words echoed in my chest like the toll of a heavy bell. "If she signs more, you will be left with nothing in your own house." I drove back to the orchard with my hands clenched on the wheel, the apple rows blurring past. Silence no longer felt like enough. If Mark was bold enough to set his trap in plain daylight, then I needed someone who could move in the shadows. That was how Isaac Moore entered my life. Isaac was a retired investigator, once with the county sheriff's office, now a private consultant. Victor trusted him, which was enough for me. We met at a quiet diner off the highway, the kind of place where no one looked too closely at your business. Isaac slid into the booth across from me, a man in his late 50s with lines carved deep around his eyes. His suit was old, his tie loose, but his gaze was sharp as glass. "What do you need me to find, Mrs. Harper?" he asked, folding his hands on the table. I took out the small folder of photos from the documents, slid them toward him. "I need to know everything about Mark Dalton, where he goes, who he talks to, what he's hiding. Because I don't believe this is just about money. Men like him always have something else." Isaac nodded once. No wasted words. "I'll start with his banking contacts. Men like Dalton don't pull loans alone. They need someone on the inside." For the first time in weeks, I felt I wasn't standing alone. Days turned into a week. I kept working the orchard, pruning branches, checking irrigation, greeting the workers with calm. But each evening, I waited for Isaac's call. It came one night just after dark. "Meet me tomorrow, same place," he said. His tone carried weight. When I arrived, Isaac already had a brown envelope on the table. He pushed it toward me without flourishing. Inside were photographs. Mark stepping out of a luxury restaurant in Chicago, his hand on the waist of a younger woman with auburn hair. Another photo showed them entering a downtown apartment building late at night. The woman was Valerie Hughes, Isaac explained, a loan officer at one of the banks where Mark had recently secured credit. The pictures made my stomach twist, but not for the reason one might expect. It wasn't jealousy or even betrayal that struck me. It was recognition. I saw the same pattern, a man using someone else's vulnerability as leverage. Valerie was his accomplice, whether willingly or blindly. "There's more," Isaac said. He placed a small recorder on the table, pressed play. Mark's voice filled the booth, smooth and mocking. "Emily is so easy to fool. She signs whatever I put in front of her. Soon the orchard will be ours, and the old widow won't even know she's signing her own bankruptcy papers." Then, Valerie's laugh chimed in, sharp and cruel. "You're a genius, Mark. A little patience, and you'll own everything. The daughter, the land, and when it's done, the mother will be left with dust." I froze. Each word landed heavier than the last. Bankruptcy, dust, old widow. He wasn't just planning theft, he was planning humiliation, as if destroying me was part of his reward. My hand tightened around the rosary beads in my coat pocket until the cross bit into my palm. Isaac watched me carefully, perhaps expecting me to cry or break, but I didn't. I sat straighter, looked at the recorder, and whispered, "Thank you for confessing, Mark." Isaac frowned. "You're not upset?" "I am beyond upset," I said quietly. "But tears give him too much. He's already written me off as weak. Let him. Every word on that tape is a nail in his own coffin." For a moment, silence stretched between us. The diner's neon light flickered in the window. Then Isaac gave a short nod. "I'll keep digging. If he's this careless, there's more to find. Paper trails, bank records, maybe even other women. We'll build a case that no one can ignore." I tucked the recorder into my bag, the bead still coiled in my hand. Inside, I felt something shift. Not despair, but resolve. Mark thought he was the puppeteer, pulling every string. He didn't know that silence had its own power, that patience was its own weapon. On the drive home, I rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and apple branches. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was no longer hidden. It was recorded, captured in Mark's own arrogant voice, and I would carry it, bead by bead, step by step, until the time came to let it speak. That night, I placed the rosary on the nightstand and whispered the same line again before closing my eyes. "Thank you for confessing, Mark." It wasn't grief that lulled me to sleep, but certainty. Isaac called 2 days after the recording. His voice was low, the kind men use when they are holding a live wire. "I found a thread that could unravel him. Kian. Mark Dalton is not his only name. Birth name, Marcos Ramirez. He has a brother, Arthur Ramirez. They used to run small ventures together, then everything burned down. Arthur drinks now, cash only, No social media. He tends to disappear into a bar on the east side off Highway 12. If anyone knows Mark's patterns, it is him. The sun was already leaning west when I drove to that bar, a squat building with a cracked sign and neon that flickered like a tired heartbeat. Inside smelled of disinfectant and old beer. A jukebox played a country ballad that never resolved. Men sat scattered along the counter like commas. The bartender polished a glass. A dart hit cork with a dull thud. I chose a booth near the back and ordered club soda. The cold stung my teeth. It kept me steady. Isaac slid in across it. From me. He sits in the far corner when he comes in, he said. He does not like strangers. He does not like cops. He hates his brother. How do I reach him without scaring him off? I asked. You reach him by being what you are, Isaac said, a mother who refuses to lie. A few minutes later, a man shuffled in wearing an old army jacket, shoulders hunched, jaw rough with stubble. He scanned the room with the reflex of someone who had learned to see trouble before trouble saw him. He took the last stool near the wall and asked for a beer. Isaac nodded toward him. Arthur, he said. I walked to the bar, my rosary rested in my pocket, heavy with use. Mr. Ramirez, I said. My name is Vivian Harper. He turned, wary. The beer paused midway to his mouth. If you are selling salvation, try another table. I'm not selling anything, I said. I am the mother of the woman your brother married. The beer lowered to the counter. I do not get involved anymore, he said. Not with Marcos, not with his wreckage, not with the people he hurts, not with the people he charms. I stay out, and I stay alive. I respect that, I said, but I need to show you something, and it will only take 5 minutes. He shook his head. I said no. 5 minutes, I repeated. Then I will walk away. You have my word. He looked at my face for a long moment. Maybe he saw my age. Maybe he saw my posture. Maybe he simply saw a woman who would not waste his time. He exhaled and nodded toward the back booth. 5. We sat. I took out the envelope with the photographs and the small recorder. I did not push them across. I lined them up carefully, like a teacher placing chalk on a desk. Your brother calls himself Mark now, I said. He's trying to use my daughter's signature to take the Harper orchard and everything attached to it. Arthur's mouth tightened. He always loved a new name. Names made him feel clean for a minute. I slid the first photo across, then another. Power of attorney, security agreement, signatures flagged with arrows. He scanned the pages with a grimace of recognition, the same way a mechanic recognizes a sound that means a blown gasket. This is how he does it, he muttered, paper and pressure. Then I pressed the recorder button. Mark's voice spilled into the booth, smooth, amused, certain. Emily is so easy to fool. She signs whatever I put in front of her. Soon the orchard will be ours, and the old widow will sign her own bankruptcy papers. Valerie's laugh rang like ice in a glass. You are a genius, Mark. The mother will be left with dust. Arthur did not move. The song on the jukebox ended. The bar hummed. He inhaled once. The sound caught. He closed his eyes and set both palms on the table. The motion made me think of a man bracing against a wave. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. My father believed. Him, he said. The words came out ragged. They were not for me. They were the truth escaping through a crack. Marcos promised a big return. We emptied savings. We signed where he pointed. When the loans came due, he was already gone. The stroke took our father in a week. Grief took our mother in a year. He did not come to either funeral. He sent a text to me that said, I will make it right. He never did. I let the silence do what it was made to do. I did not reach across the table. I did not tell him I understood. I held still and waited while he wiped his face with the back of his hand. You came to ask me to testify, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I answered. Not out of revenge, out of repair. A court will not care about my broken heart. It will care about patterns. It will care about witnesses. It will care about a brother who saw how the trick works. He flinched at the word brother. Then he straightened in his seat. Marcos always said I was the weak one because I could not sell a lie with a smile. But I have one thing he does not. I can stand in the same light with the same name. I slid another photograph toward him, a shot of Mark and Valerie leaving the restaurant, his hand at her waist, his grin loose with victory. He's not careful anymore, I said. He thinks the town adores his new name. He thinks I am a relic who will fade. Arthur stared at the photo a long time. Then he pushed it back gently, as though it were a fragile animal. The worst thing about Marcos is not the stealing, he said. It is the way he makes good people doubt themselves. He turns kindness into a weapon. He tried, I said. I let him underestimate me. Arthur huffed a thin laugh, then his face settled. If I testify, he will come for me, he said, not with fists, with whispers, with threats, with men who owe him favors. He will tell people I am jealous, that I am bitter, that I want to ruin a happy marriage. He already tells them that about me, I said. I still wake up. The orchard still stands. He looked at my hands. The rosary lay against the tabletop now, walnut beads catching the dim light. You carry faith like a tool, he murmured. I carry silence like a tool, I corrected gently. Faith keeps my hands steady while I use it. He took a long breath and nodded to himself, as if he had arrived at a decision he had been circling for years. All right, he said. I will tell the court what he did to our family. I will tell them how he changes names, how he moves loans, how he smiles when signatures bleed. I will do it under oath. I felt the weight in my chest loosen, not with triumph, but with relief, the kind a person feels when a bridge holds underfoot. Thank you, Arthur, I said. You have given back something he stole, not money, not land, a piece of truth. He slid out of the booth and stood, shoulders less hunched. I cannot bring back our parents, he said, but I can stop him from burying someone else's. He leaned closer. He will not expect this from me. He thinks I am finished. Let him, I said. He also thinks I am finished. We shook hands. His grip was firm, not theatrical. At the door he paused and turned. One more thing, he said. Do not warn him. Make him hear my voice where he cannot wiggle out, in front of a judge. I have no intention of warning him, I said. I am done speaking to masks. I stepped into the evening. The sky held a narrow strip of gold above the dark line of trees. Isaac joined me on the sidewalk and raised an eyebrow. I nodded. He will testify, I said. Isaac allowed himself a rare smile. Then the story just changed. I slipped the rosary back into my pocket and felt its familiar weight. The beads were warm against my skin. I thought of Emily's face when the truth finally met the light. I thought of the town's whispers losing air. I thought of Mark hearing a voice he had spent years outrunning. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it is the doorway where courage waits. I drove to Emily's house a few days after my meeting with Arthur, the winter sky low and heavy with gray. My car crunched across the gravel, and I sat for a moment, steadying my breath, my rosary warm in my coat pocket. I had evidence now. I had witnesses. But the hardest part was not the courtroom. It was my own daughter. When she opened the door, she looked older than her 29 years. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, shadows deep under her eyes. Laura was there, of course, hovering near the sofa with a mug of tea as though she owned the room. "Mom," Emily said, trying to smile. "You should have called. I'm tired." I stepped inside anyway. The air smelled of lavender candles, as if they were trying to burn away unease. Emily sat down on the couch, and Laura slid close, wrapping an arm around her. My daughter leaned against her friend's shoulder like a child who couldn't carry her own weight. "I need to talk to you," I said softly. Emily shook her head before I could continue. "Not today, Mom. Please. You're making everything harder." Laura's hand stroked Emily's arm in a calculated gesture. "Vivian, she needs peace, not more doubts." I ignored Laura, fixing my gaze on Emily. "Honey, I know you love him, but there are things you don't see. I need you to listen before it's too late." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "Why can't you just let me be happy? All my life you kept me close, and now you can't stand to let me go. You think you're protecting me, but you're just afraid of being alone." Her words cut deeper than any gossip at the market, deeper than the whispers of neighbors. To be called selfish by the very child I had given my life for. This was the wound Mark had engineered. I swallowed back every protest, and the moral conflict tore at me. If I spoke, she would turn away. If I stayed silent, she would walk blind into ruin. My beads pressed into my palm, grounding me. Laura whispered something into Emily's hair, and Emily nodded, sobbing. For a moment, I wanted to shout the truth, to play the recording, to thrust the photos in front of her, but I stopped. My silence had power too. I reached into my pocket, drew out the rosary, and placed it gently on the coffee table in front of them. The walnut beads glowed faintly in the candlelight, familiar when unbroken. "When you need me," I said quietly, "remember, I was here." I stood and walked to the door. Emily didn't stop me. Laura didn't speak. Only the faint clatter of beads shifting in the stillness marked my leaving. Outside, the cold air struck my cheeks. I felt tears threaten, but I held them back. This wasn't the end. It was only the silence before the truth arrived. The courthouse in our small Michigan town had never seen such a crowd. By the time I arrived with Victor, the benches were filled, and people lined the walls, whispering in tight circles. Farmers in worn jackets, shopkeepers with folded arms, women from the market who once avoided my eyes, all had come to watch. Justice, or perhaps spectacle, had drawn them. The oak-paneled room smelled of dust and paper, sunlight cutting through tall windows like blades. I sat in the front row, hands clasped around my rosary. My beads felt smooth, solid, a reminder that silence was not surrender. Mark entered a few minutes later, dressed in a tailored navy suit, his smirk as polished as his shoes. He nodded at acquaintances as though this were a gala, not a trial. Emily followed, her steps slow, her hair loose around her face. Laura guided her by the arm, whispering, her expression almost triumphant. My daughter's eyes stayed down, red-rimmed, exhausted. The judge, a stern man with steel-gray hair, rapped his gavel. "This court is now in session." His voice carried like a hammer striking stone. Victor rose. His back was slightly bent with age, but his words came sharp and steady. He outlined the scheme, the documents Emily had signed, the loans, the collateral, the pattern of fraud. Then, with a small motion, he nodded toward me. I drew the recorder from my purse. The clerk pressed play, and Mark's voice filled the chamber. "Emily is so easy to fool. She signs whatever I put in front of her. Soon the orchard will be ours, and the old widow will sign her own bankruptcy papers." Laughter followed. Valerie's laugh, sharp as glass. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, heads shaking. I turned my eyes to Emily. She froze, her lips parting, the blood draining from her cheeks. The words struck her like stones, one after another. Easy to fool. Old widow. Bankruptcy. Laura leaned in, gripping Emily's hand. "Don't listen," she whispered urgently, but my daughter pulled back, her fingers slipping. Free. That single motion, so small, was louder than any outcry. Victor let the silence linger, then continued. "Your Honor, these are not the words of a husband. They are the words of a predator." He laid out the photos of Mark with Valerie Hughes, each one sliding across the table like evidence of betrayal incarnate. Mark's composure cracked. He shifted in his seat, jaw tight. He muttered, "They mean nothing." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Then came the moment that bent the trial into something more. Arthur Ramirez, Mark's estranged brother, took the stand. He walked with shoulders stiff, his shirt clean but wrinkled. For a long moment, he said nothing, just looked at Mark as though weighing years of bitterness. Finally, his voice emerged, rough but clear. "I am his brother, Marcos Ramirez. You call him Mark. I called him brother once." He recounted everything, the schemes, the stolen savings, the stroke that killed their father, the illness that consumed their mother. His voice broke when he said, "He never came home. Not for a funeral, not for a prayer." The courtroom was silent but for Arthur's words. Each one was a hammer on Mark's mask. I looked at Emily. Tears had begun to slip down her cheeks, silent rivers against pale skin. She stared at Arthur as if seeing her husband's reflection in another man's ruin. Then the judge turned to Emily. "Do you have anything you wish to say, Mrs. Dalton?" The room held its breath. I held mine, my beads pressed hard into my palm. Emily rose slowly. Her knees trembled and she steadied herself against the bench. Time slowed. I could see a single tear slide down her cheek, catch in the light, fall. That tear was heavier than all the evidence laid before us. She drew in a breath. Her voice was fragile, but it did not waver. I was deceived. I believed in someone who never loved me. I will not carry his lies any longer. I want a divorce. The words cracked the air open. A murmur rose, not of shock, but of release. It was as though the entire town had exhaled at once. Mark surged to his feet. "Emily, don't you dare!" he shouted, but the bailiff's hand pressed him back down. Emily sat again, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking, but even through her sobs I saw something new. Relief. I closed my eyes. The beads slid beneath my fingers. The line I had carried for weeks echoed again inside me. Silence is not weakness. It brought me here. And now, with my daughter's voice breaking free, it has given us both strength. The verdict came on a bright morning, though the air was chilled with the bite of autumn. The courtroom was full again. The whole town seemed to hold its breath as the judge read each count. Mark Dalton, also known as Marcos Ramirez, guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of trust. 7 years in state prison. Alio Ramirez, guilty as an accomplice, 3 years. The words landed like the toll of a heavy bell. Mark's smirk finally cracked. He twisted in his chair, searching for Emily's gaze, but she kept her head bowed. Valerie Hughes, the banker who had stood beside him in his charade, didn't wait for the bailiffs. She stood in the aisle, crossed her arms, and said coldly, "I want nothing to do with failure." Her heels clattered against the marble as she left, her contempt as sharp as her perfume. Laura, too, slipped away. No grand farewell, no words of explanation. She simply gathered her bag, head down, her shoulders hunched under the weight of the town's eyes. By the time the trial ended, she was gone from Harper Ridge, her name spoken only in whispers that faded like smoke. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I only sat, the walnut rosary warm in my hand. The bead slid slowly under my thumb as I whispered to myself, "Justice may come late, but it comes." Afterward, Emily returned to the orchard with me. She walked slowly between the apple rows, her breath visible in the crisp air. The trees had begun to drop their leaves, and the ground was mottled red and gold. She stopped, inhaled deeply, and closed her eyes. "It smells like home," she said softly. For weeks she rose early, stood beside me in the farmhouse office, and learned what I had carried alone for years: accounts, contracts, workers' schedules. She walked the land with the foreman, asked questions, and scribbled notes. Each evening she sat at the old oak desk where her father once kept the ledgers, her hair falling into her face as she traced every line of ink. Watching her, I saw the girl I had once held and the woman she was becoming. One night, after she finished reviewing invoices, she looked up at me. "Mom, I don't know how you did this alone all these years." I smiled faintly, the rosary lying on the desk between us. "You just keep walking forward, even when no one thanks you." There was something I had never told her, a truth I had carried in silence. That night I decided to speak. "Emily, I said, when you were in college, your tuition rose and we didn't have enough. Your father had already passed, and the orchard was just breaking even. I sold the jewelry Charles gave me when we married, the pearls, the gold, even the sapphire brooch. I never told you because I wanted you to focus on your studies, not on what we lost." Her eyes widened. Tears shimmered. "Mom, you sold everything for me?" I shook my head gently. "Not everything, just enough. Jewelry is only metal and stone. You, your future, that was worth more." She pressed her hands over mine, gripping tight. "I wish I had known." "You know now," I said. We sat in silence, the kind that heals rather than wounds. Outside, the wind moved through the orchard, carrying the scent of fallen apples. In the days that followed, life found its rhythm again. The workers began to call Emily Miss Harper with the same respect they once gave me. She learned to judge the weight of a harvest in her palm, to sense when rain would bless or curse a season. The town, too, shifted. People who once whispered behind my back now greeted me with nods, some even with apologies. I accepted them with quiet grace. On the porch one evening, Emily joined me as the sun dropped behind the hills. She leaned against the railing, her breath soft in the cold. "Do you think I'll ever be as strong as you?" she asked. I looked at her, at the determination set in her face, the tired but steady light in her eyes. "You already are," I said. I rolled the beads once more between my fingers, their familiar weight anchoring me. My husband was gone, my illusions shattered, but my daughter was beside me again, her spirit steadier than I had dared to hope. "Justice may come late," I whispered again, this time aloud, "but it comes, and love stays." The sun was lowering over Harper Ridge, pouring amber light across the orchard. The apples still clung to the branches, their skins glowing red and gold, a final offering before winter. I stood on the porch with Emily, the wooden boards warm beneath our feet. The house behind us creaked softly, as though it, too, was relieved to breathe again. We did not speak at first. We simply watched the rows of trees sway in the evening breeze, the horizon stretching wide and forgiving. For the first time in many months, the silence around us was not heavy. It was light, almost sacred. Emily drew in a long breath and exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as if she had shed a great weight. "Mom," she said, her voice steady, "I will never let anyone deceive me again. I will protect myself and the legacy of our family." I turned to her. The fading sunlight caught in her hair, making it shine like copper threads. Her eyes, once so clouded by trust in the wrong man, now carried a different light. Resolve. The kind of light a person finds after walking through fire. I reached for her hand, wrapped it in mine. The warmth of her palm reminded me of when she was a child, running through these same orchards with scraped knees and sticky fingers. I squeezed gently. "That's all I ever wanted, Emily, for you to see your worth, to know your strength." She smiled faintly, tears welling but not falling. "I thought silence meant weakness, Mom. I thought your quiet was surrender, but now I understand." I nodded. The words rose in me, the same words I had carried through every trial. "Silence does not mean weakness." Her lips trembled as she repeated it back to me. "Silence does not mean weakness." The orchard shimmered in the dusk, each leaf reflecting the soft gold of the setting sun. It felt like the land itself was agreeing with us, whispering its own resilience. Generations had worked this soil, bent their backs under the same sky, endured storms and droughts, and still the trees bore fruit. That was our inheritance. Not just the land, but the will to endure, quietly, with dignity. Emily leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. "Do you think people will forget all the gossip, the things they said?" "People always talk," I said, "but the truth has a way of lasting longer than whispers." We stood there as the sky turned from gold to rose, then to a quiet lavender. The orchard darkened, but the house behind us glowed warmly through its windows. The workers had gone home, the tools set aside, and in the calm of twilight, it felt as though everything broken had begun to knit together again. I thought of Mark in his cell, of Laura somewhere far away, of Valerie chasing another illusion of wealth. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a calm acceptance. Retaliation had never been my aim. What mattered was that my daughter was free and the land was safe. I pressed the rosary in my pocket, the beads smooth with years of use. It had been my anchor in silence, my weapon when words would have been wasted. Now it was only a reminder. I had endured, and in enduring I had won. Emily straightened, her gaze sweeping over the orchard with the eye of someone who belonged to it. "This is home," she said softly, "and I want it to stay that way, not just for me, for us, for the workers, for everyone who depends on it. I want to do this with you." I smiled, a quiet pride filling me. "Then you will, and when the time comes, you will lead it better than I ever did." We fell silent again, but it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of peace, of understanding without the need for words. As the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the hills, I thought of all the nights I had sat in this very spot, praying into the dark, clutching my beads, wondering if anyone heard. Now I know the answer. Strength is not always in the cry or in the fight. Sometimes it is in the waiting, in the steady hand, in the quiet refusal to yield. "Silence does not mean weakness," I whispered one last time, more to myself than to Emily. She squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. "No, Mom, it never did." The porch light flickered on above us, spilling its gentle glow. The orchard stretched ahead, strong and endless, a promise renewed. And as I stood with my daughter, hand in hand, I felt the truth settle deep in my chest. I had not just protected our land, I had given Emily back to herself. Not revenge, not triumph, but return.